veterans. So thank you all for, again, being here with us for this important day. Honestly, this is a privilege for me, not just because I remember my early political career having an opportunity to walk for Senator Jeff Flake, then Congressman Flake, and I've known Congressman Stanton since he was a member of USGLC's advisory committee as the mayor of Phoenix. And General Thomas, thank you, of course, for coming out from California to be here for this discussion. And for all of you, I know it's 10:30 in the morning, not a normal time that we get together for lunch, as we often do, but thank you for making time. This is really a privilege. I also want to thank all of our advisory committee members here in Arizona. There's at least 25 of you in the room. Thank you all for being here. And to our local partners, the Phoenix Committee on Foreign Relations, where I have to admit I'm a little bit biased as I'm the chairman of the board, and Global Ties Arizona, thank you all for your partnership as well. Now, I know you all aren't here to listen to me, but I'd like to tell you just a little bit about our organization, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, and our work here in Arizona. We're a group of who's been around just over 30 years of business leaders, faith-based leaders, nonprofit leaders, military veterans, farmers from all 50 states around the country, but we've been involved here in Arizona for 15 years or more and just a really robust presence here. We talk about the importance of America's investments in international assistance around the world alongside defense and why that creates the conditions for a better and safer world, yes, but also for a better, safer, and stronger and more prosperous Arizona and America. That's why USGLC is led by our National Advisory Council, which is chaired by former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, that includes almost every former Secretary of State, Defense, and Treasury from both Republican and Democratic administrations. It's why Admiral Mullen and the growing voice of the military and veteran community that we work with around the country understand that it's cheaper to prevent war than to have to go fight one. And it's cheaper not just in the context of dollars, which it certainly is, but also both in America's purse and, as I like to say, America's treasure. That's why our National Security Advisory Council, which General Thomas is a part of, thank you for being here, sir, includes almost 270 retired 3- and 4-star general and flag officers, obviously the very top of America's military class, who help us make the case for why these investments are so important and why we have a national organization of over 30,000 veterans for Smart Power, a group of over 30,000 retired 2-star generals to privates who fundamentally believe that we have to strengthen America's non-military tools of national power. And what really brings this very strange bedfellow coalition together is this fundamental belief that America has a strategic role to play in the world. You know, recent polling shows that Americans are worried. And frankly, I'm a little worried. I'm sure some of you are too, about your own economic security, our national security in the face of growing adversaries around the world and threats from our rivals. And that's why a strategic 1% of the federal budget, literally less than 1% that we spend on America's international assistance programs, we believe are so important for our national security, to maintain our American prosperity, and really, as I like to talk about it, for the importance of the American value proposition. It's who we are as a people. Again, not just because it's what we should do, even though I think it is, to help the most vulnerable among us, but because it's good for us here at home. People in Arizona understand this better than most, considering we know that 95% of the world's markets are outside of our borders. How many of you in here trade around the world? It's crucial to Arizona's economy that we engage the rest of the world. And $28 billion of exports from Arizona just last year that supports over 20% of the jobs in the state. So here in Arizona, we understand why America's leadership around the world matters. We understand why we do what we do. So we're really excited for this program. But before we introduce the great congressman and our other speakers, I'm really excited to introduce a couple of my friends. Kristen Allen, if you'll join me on stage, and Marina Sandoval. Kristen is the president and CEO of Global Ties Arizona, and Marina, the executive director of the State 48 Foundation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Marina Sandoval, and I'm the Executive Director of the State 48 Foundation, a local nonprofit that fuels Arizona dreams and drives local prosperity through entrepreneurship. As you've heard already, the stakes for America's global leadership are higher than ever. With a growing number of international crises and humanitarian conflicts raging around the world, it's clear that leading globally matters locally. And that leading locally, as we do in Arizona, can have an international impact. The leaders of our businesses here in Tempe and across Phoenix will tell you that the private sector alone cannot keep us competitive in a growing global marketplace. That is why we need vital strategic investments in diplomacy and development to help fight corruption, promote rule of law, and open new markets for our goods and services, which is key to our economic prosperity here at home. As one of nearly 4,000 Arizonans who have served in the U.S. Peace Corps, I served in Peru and focused on community economic development. In that role, I saw firsthand the value and importance of America's development toolkit. Over my 2 years of service, I had the honor of serving in a fishing community called El Alto in the region of Piura. My work primarily focused on small business advising, women's economic empowerment, and establishing community banks. During our training, they told us that the second year is when the magic happened. What they meant was that the majority of our work would take place then, because building trust takes time. I lived with a host family during my service who welcomed me as another member of their family. 3 months before my service ended, my host mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. She passed away a month after I returned to the States. I'm forever grateful that I've spent the last 2 years of her life with her. There are thousands of returned Peace Corps volunteers across this great state with stories like mine and experiences that shaped their professional journeys. The Peace Corps develops citizens who return to the workforce more empathetic and culturally sensitive to our global community. Investing in programs like the Peace Corps is not only essential to strengthening diplomacy, but also ensuring that the magic continues here at home. I'll now turn it over to someone who understands the importance of America's global leadership as much as anyone, my friend, Kristen Allen, the President and CEO of Global Ties Arizona.
Thank you so much, Marina, and thank you again to Luke and USGLC for the opportunity to be here this morning. I am Kristen Allen, the President and CEO at Global Ties Arizona. At Global Ties Arizona, we are proud to connect Arizona and the world by hosting international exchange programs that bring current and emerging foreign leaders from across government, industry, nonprofit, and academia to our local communities. Chief among these is the U.S. Department of State's International Visitor Leadership Program, our nation's premier professional exchange program, established in the 1940s and implemented locally by Global Ties Arizona for more than 60 years. These exchanges are a cornerstone of American public diplomacy. They help keep our nation safer by fostering mutual understanding and building international coalitions to address shared global challenges. They make us stronger by showcasing American values, innovation, and leadership. And they make us more prosperous, economically and diplomatically, by paving the way for future trade, collaboration, and investment. That global engagement doesn't just yield diplomatic benefits. It also delivers real economic returns here at home. In 2023, the Global Ties U.S. National Network turned $7.1 million in federal investment into $81.7 million in economic impact across communities in the United States. That's an 11-to-1 return. Here in Arizona, our 25 exchange programs implemented in 2024 generated more than a 7-to-1 return through lodging, transportation, tourism, and by supporting our small businesses. When Americans engage with the world, we don't just create global goodwill, we build a more connected, secure, and competitive United States. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce today's featured speakers who know the importance of America's global leadership more than anyone. After some remarks from the Congressman, Luke Wenz of USGLC will join us back here on stage to moderate today's discussion on what America's global leadership is worth to Arizona. Joining Luke and the Congressman today is Lieutenant General Ty Thomas, an Air Force veteran with more than 3 decades of service to our country. General Thomas most recently served as the Deputy Commander of the Pacific Air Forces at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii, and as the Deputy Theater Air Component Commander to the Commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Lieutenant General Thomas has commanded operational flying units at the squadron, group, and wing levels and has piloted 11 different aircraft over 4,000 total hours. Next, Ambassador, and most of us know him as Senator Jeff Flake, has a long history of leading locally and globally. After serving Arizonans in Congress, first in the House of Representatives and later in the Senate, Senator Flake served most recently as the U.S. Ambassador to Turkey. Before entering Congress, Ambassador Flake served as Executive Director for both the Goldwater Institute in Arizona and the Foundation for Democracy in Namibia during the country's transition to independence. Ambassador Flake currently serves as the Director of the Institute of Politics at Arizona State University and is Chairman of the Board of World Trade Center, Utah. He also serves as a visiting fellow at Brigham Young University. It is now my pleasure to introduce the reason we're here today, Congressman Greg Stanton, the U.S. Representative for Arizona's 4th Congressional District since 2019. Congressman Stanton serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. He has a long history of fighting for Arizonan families, from his 9 years on Phoenix City Council to his 6 years as the mayor of Phoenix. Congressman Stanton has always focused on building an economy rooted in innovation, trade, and local job creation. We are honored to have Congressman Stanton here today to talk about how America's leadership around the world is critical for the economic prosperity and security of Arizona. With that, please join me in welcoming Congressman Stanton to the stage.
All right, thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Kristen, for putting this wonderful event together. Thank you to everyone who supports USGLC. The work that you do is more important now than ever. To Lieutenant General Thomas, thank you for your years of service to the nation. I'm looking forward to hearing your remarks. To our friend, Senator and Ambassador Flake, thank you for your principled leadership in the U.S. Senate and on the global stage. Let's give them another big round of applause. And we do live in challenging times. Around the world, leaders are swiftly eroding democratic norms. A new axis of autocracy is developing in Europe. Vladimir Putin continues his bloody and illegal invasion of Ukraine in the greatest threat to peace in Europe since World War II in the Middle East. Iran is still working through its proxies, including Hamas, to sow chaos and threaten the very existence of its neighbors. In Indo-Pacific, China is conducting military exercises in the South China Sea, threatening our ally Taiwan. This, combined with its aggressive focus on the global south and the technological arms race we're locked in, that should alarm us all, as Lieutenant General Thomas knows well. None of these challenges lend themselves to quick or easy solutions, but each of them demands principled, consistent, strong American leadership. Right now, the most dangerous lie we can indulge in is if we disentangle ourselves. We tell ourselves that we could disentangle ourselves from the global economy, end our humanitarian commitments, and withdraw from our strategic alliances. That will somehow return America to greatness. It won't. America's interests are global. Arizona's interests are also global, and our security and prosperity depend on the strength of our alliances. But Donald Trump has championed a retreat into isolationism. America first threatens to become America alone. On day one, President Trump withdrew from the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Accords, both early indicators of the new administration's intent to step back from the international community. He's in the middle of right now of negotiating a new nuclear deal with Iran, a necessary step, but only because he pulled out of the 2015 deal during his first term and gave Iran the space to enrich the uranium to 60% and be a mere weeks from creating a nuclear bomb. He's revoked temporary protected status for Afghans here in the United States, here in Tempe, some on the ASU campus, those who fought the Taliban alongside American troops. It is a sick betrayal, and it devalues America's commitments. The president and his lieutenant, Elon Musk, are bent on destroying our federal national security workforce, firing thousands of women and men with deep expertise and a proven commitment to securing our interests around the world. Chaos at our national security departments and agency does nothing to promote a secure America. It does exactly the opposite. He also moved to end USAID and make deep cuts to other foreign assistance, abruptly disabling one of the most effective tools of American foreign influence. They've even ratcheted back funding for the UN World Food Program run by a great fellow Arizona, Cindy McCain. She's an outstanding champion for people facing extreme hunger and starvation the world over, and Ambassador McCain has underscored that cuts will, quote, undermine global stability, unquote. This American retreat has left a void that China is all too eager to fill. In fact, they've already started. Mere days after USAID payments were cut, China stepped in with the funds to help a Cambodian project finish clearing landmines. And after the devastating recent earthquake in Burma, China has been the face of the rescue mission. It should have been the United States. President Xi understands the value of soft power, and China's ambitions for its Belt and Road Initiative are staggering, nothing short of an attempt to build a new world order dominated by the Chinese Communist Party. The goal is to develop a China-centric global infrastructure, investing in developing countries to establish strategic control at the expense of the United States. Look no further than Africa, the continent of Africa. It is the fastest growing population with many of the fastest growing economies on planet Earth. In recent years, Chinese influence and investment on the African continent have soared. China is now Africa's biggest single trading partner. American foreign policy with African nations should not be aimed solely at countering China, but it's clear that the United States is losing the long-term influence battle on the continent. That's going to hurt us for decades to come. And China is rapidly growing its influence in our own backyard here in our arena. China has been strategically expanding its presence in Latin America and the Caribbean for decades, extending its military, political, and economic influence in the region. Many of our nearby neighbors no longer recognize Taiwan. It's clear that the U.S. will need to dedicate time and resources to this region that has for years felt left out by Washington's priorities. And there's a new pressing need to lessen our reliance on China, for example, semiconductor materials and other critical sectors. Fortunately, there is strong bipartisan appetite in Congress to attract and incentivize investments in reliable trading partners here in the Western Hemisphere. I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm on the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, and I have worked across the aisle to promote nearshoring of upstream and downstream parts of the critical semiconductor supply chain. That's everything from mining and processing critical materials to testing and packaging chips. As Arizona welcomes billions and billions of investment from semiconductor and other advanced manufacturing companies, that reliable, secure supply chain is paramount. And our next door neighbor and our largest trading partner, Mexico, is one of the prime nearshoring destinations. When it comes to America's foreign policy with our neighbor, Mexico, we need to get away from just talking about border security. That's critically important, don't get me wrong. But we need a comprehensive Mexico strategy. We need our two countries to come together and find a path forward on issues like immigration reform, long-term trade policy, sustained investments in interconnectivity between our ports of entry, and a strong North American security partnership. I had the opportunity to meet with President Sheinbaum in Mexico City last year before she was sworn in, and we talked about all of these important issues. But the president really lit up when I started talking about the opportunities presented by nearshoring. Earlier this year, President Sheinbaum announced the Katsuri Project, the indigenous word for sand, in reference to silicon. It's an ambitious initiative aimed at bolstering Mexico's semiconductor industry, and it should be celebrated. Tensions with China should be drawing us closer to our neighbors in Mexico and Canada. This should be a golden age for North America and North American partnership, our three nations working together. But instead, we are moving further apart. Mexican judicial reforms are undermining investor confidence in that country, and on our side, we're dealing with the self-inflicted wound that are the Trump tariffs. President Trump's incoherent, across-the-board tariff policy is roiling the markets, almost driving the United States into recession, and it is isolating America on the world stage. I'm not opposed to strategic tariffs, none of us are, but right now they are using a sledgehammer where they should be using a scalpel. He even cut off America from our closest allies with whom we have free trade agreements, like the USMCA, the very same USMCA that President Trump negotiated in his first term. And what I was one of the leaders in the House side, I was one of the early Democrats to support the USMCA and help lead that passage through the House. Here's the bottom line. Economic alliances are national security alliances, and both require strong, steady, and reliable partners. This current exercise in stupidity is forcing America's longtime allies to question Washington's long-term reliability and to make other plans, ones that exclude the United States of America. And when America is no longer the leader of the free world, that has massive implications. It throws into question the United States dollar's role as the de facto global reserve currency. If we lose that, we lose our leverage to impose sanctions on bad actors. I've introduced legislation to restore power over trade and tariff where it belongs in the United States Congress. Those of us who understand how important this is need to speak up. Democrats, independents, and Republicans. Trump is president of the United States, but he is not a king. The United States socioeconomic and military might, it's been built up over centuries of thoughtful, principled leaders. Trump didn't create that. He's benefiting from that strong American long-term leadership, but he didn't create that. He's now leveraging this power that was created for him to live out his authoritarian impulses. Look no further than his assault on colleges and universities, the cornerstone of American success story. The American academic system is the envy of the world. Every dollar of federal investment is repaid many times over with world-leading technological innovation, cutting-edge biomedical research, and a booming economy. Now Trump's targeting scientific research funding on everything from climate change to cancer. Researchers are fleeing our country to Canada and Europe. And his attack on foreign-born students, postgrads, and PhDs, we should be working to attract the best and the brightest from around the world to study and work here in the United States. Even better, right down the road at ASU. Instead of driving them abroad, we should be stapling a green card to their diploma. Look, in the face of unprecedented assault, universities need to lock arms and stand together. That's how you stand up to a bully. Because if we allow academic exodus to continue, it will put us at such an incredible disadvantage, not just in curing diseases, but in pushing the boundaries of a century-defining technology like AI. You know, I serve on the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. I don't consider China our enemy. They're our strategic competitor. But winning that competition can only be accomplished in coordination with our global partners. Here's an example. The Biden administration built on the success of the first Trump administration to restrict export of advanced chips and chip-making equipment to China, limiting their access to the world's most powerful computer processors. U.S. export controls could not succeed on their own. We have to work with our allies like Japan, Netherlands, and South Korea. America's strength is in our alliances, most especially NATO. Trump thinks NATO is doing America, is America doing the world a favor. He couldn't be more wrong. He wants to give up on our alliances and go to a great world power view of how to do international relations. And if there's one person who knows the singular power of alliances like NATO's, it's Ambassador Jeff Flake. He deserves immense credit for pushing Turkey to relent on its opposition to approving Finland and Sweden's accession into this critical alliance. In fact, he was knighted for it. Let's give him a big round of applause. Thank you for your leadership, Senator Flake. America's network of allies and partners, built and sustained by generations of bipartisan American leaders, remains the core strategic strength unrivaled in the world. But to meet the challenges of the 21st century, our vision cannot be simply about defending the past, but about building a future where our global alliances are strong enough to withstand the forces that are currently trying to dismantle them. That is our task together. I look forward to a great policy discussion today. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Y'all hear me? Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Congressman. We really appreciated that. I think this community is there to have you representing them in Congress. So, thank you. Let me start with a question on America's international assistance and how it works alongside our national security. Thank you. Bryn is looking at me, and you all have on your tables. If you would like to ask a question, please fill that out. Put your hand up. One member of my team will go around and pick it up, and that way you can ask a question to the congressman or to any of the panelists themselves if you fill that out. Congressman, let me start with you, but let me also start let me start by maybe setting the stage here. Obviously, whether it be the PRC's military buildup in the Indo-Pacific, Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine, conflict in the Middle East, there's growing tensions all over the world, and it's impacting us here at home. As both a former member of our advisory committee, and a member of Congress who serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, can you talk about why you think investments in America's international assistance programs are so important for our security and our economics here at home?
Well, look, there is, obviously with the dismantling of USAID, a great debate going on, not only in Washington, but around the country and around the globe. What is the benefit of soft power? Is soft power important? Right. And of course, in my view of the world, it's critical. We have no other option. That is how we best counteract the influence of the Chinese Communist Party and what their vision of the world versus ours is by winning the hearts and minds of our friends around the globe. So supporting Cindy McCain in the World Food Program, of course it's about feeding starving people first and foremost, but it's also about winning over generations of young people, particularly in the global south, viewing the United States as a friend and ally, and someone's going to be there in that time of trouble. I mentioned some of the weather incidents that have occurred around the globe with the devastating impacts, and China's there first before we are. Right. It's not just about the short-term cleanup from a hurricane. They will remember that. The people that were helped by either us or China or anyone, they will remember that for the rest of their lives, and it'll impact how they view the role of the United States. And of course, my view is that we can only be successful through our strategic alliances. And look, I'm pretty critical on President Trump on these issues. I think he deserves it, and his team deserves it. Yeah. Because, as I mentioned, these alliances have been built up that benefit us so much, not just militarily, but economically, by having a strong, stable world. He didn't do it. He didn't create it. Those are created by people before. We all benefit from it. We've all inherited that great work that was done before us. And he views some of our countries in NATO that somehow they're like ankle biters to the United States, right. that we're doing them a favor, not realizing that our system of global alliances and maintaining that and strengthening that is how we maintain peace, and peace is the number one thing we need for the United States to continue to grow and succeed economically.
Thanks, Congressman. Ambassador, let me follow up with you here. Obviously, you spent nearly Congress the last 2.5 years or more in Turkey. Talk about, from your perspective, why the, honestly, from your unique perspective, what would happen if America does fully remove itself from the world stage?
Oof.
Great question. Is this working? Yes, no?
You guys hear him?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, can I address the question you gave him?
Sure,
Just-
please.
This one, my favorite example on the benefits of soft power, came from back in the mid-'80s. I wrote my master's thesis on Robert Mugabe and his hold on to power in Zimbabwe in the first 2 election cycles there. Turned out 30-some years later, he was still president. I was a senator. I went to Zimbabwe and sat across the table from him and listened to him just berate the U.S. and the UK, and Margaret Thatcher had stiffed him at Lancaster House, and Tony Blair was a thug, and and Barack Obama ignored him at the UN, and then he got to George W. Bush, and I finally saw my in. I said, "Hey, Mr. President, George W. Bush was the author of PEPFAR, a program to distribute AIDS drugs across Africa that saved millions of lives. Zimbabwe itself had a 25% infection rate. I said, that program may have saved your country." And he sat back for a minute, he said, "I'll give you that." I could not wait to get home and tell George W. Bush, former president at that time, that he'd been praised by a dictator. But the point is, that program, aside from alleviating a lot of human suffering, saving millions of lives, bought us enormous goodwill, and still does, across the entire continent. We have security agreements, intelligence sharing arrangements, protocols on public health that we draw on because of that soft power. And if you get rid of that, you really leave a big hole. In terms of U.S. leadership abroad, if there's anything I learned or appreciated more in the last 3 years in Turkey was the importance of American leadership. We shouldn't treat our NATO partners as if they're ankle biters, as you say. They stood with us. The only time Article 5 has ever been deployed was after 9/11. Canada, who we're joking should be the 51st state. I was there last week. Doug Ford in Ontario said, "There is no more patriotic Canadian than this Canadian, patriotic for America."
Right.
And but to use rhetoric like that and go after people who stood and fought and died with us in Afghanistan, the Turks as well, is just wrong. So we need American leadership. NATO has been the most successful defense alliance in the history of the world for the past almost 80 years, and we've got to remember that and keep with it.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. General Thomas, let me come to you. You have more than 3 decades of service, obviously. You've worked all over the world, especially, but I know your last command was in the Indo-Pacific. Can you talk a little bit about how you saw your work in the military work hand in hand with the diplomats and development professionals in the places you've served around the world?
Yeah, sure. So it's one thing, I think, for us to have transactional relationships. I think there's a time and a place for that. The Congressman mentioned instances where that's the case, but Marina made a really good point, and if you caught on that, she talked about trust. And that's the connection here, is that trust isn't built over a transactional relationship. Trust is built over time. Trust is built over a sequence of things where, more often than not, if we're extending something and it's not really clear that we benefit from it, at least in the near term, but somebody else does, they go, wow, maybe this is a country, a nation, a military that we want to get closer to. Right. How does that translate then into the, so the Congressman mentioned something about being the beneficiaries of. I would submit that the U.S. military and our national security, all of the elements of it are beneficiaries of what we're referring to as soft power. Because how does that translate into, I'll use the alternative, which is hard power, in so many different ways. And you could say at the very top end of that is You know, in the instance of the alliance that we have with NATO or the bilateral alliances that we have in the Pacific, we actually do planning together on how we're going to deal with very high-end contingencies. And everything that our ally is going to do is something that we need to do less of, or in some instances, we don't even have to do because they're more motivated, more prepared, and capable of doing it. But if you kind of step back down from there, it's so important to talk about and understand access-based flight and the implications of that and the enabling that does for us to address our own security needs as well as those of others around the entire globe, down to exercising and just partnership and increasing the capabilities of others to the last part, and sometimes this isn't well understood, is the things that don't happen because we have soft power and we have trust. So we can get into examples of that, but that's what I think, Luke, is so important here, that connection.
Yeah. Well, thanks, General. I couldn't agree with you more. Let me follow up with you. Obviously, the People's Republic of China, or PRC, is our biggest strategic competitor around the world. We talk about whether it's their Belt and Road Initiative, their aggressive diplomatic engagement, which I'm sure the ambassador knows very well. They're a threat to our economic security and to our national security. As I said earlier, you were the deputy commander of Pacific Air Forces, where literally he and the commander oversaw 46,000 airmen, so a pretty big job, whether that be all over the Pacific in Japan, South Korea, all over. Can you talk a little bit about how you saw U.S. international assistance programs in the Indo-Pacific specifically, and how that influenced and helped your work in the military?
Certainly. So Philippines is probably a good example to start out with. So we've had a long-standing relationship with the Philippines, and there's even a colonial history with it. But one of the things that I've sensed and observed and felt the effects of is that we always stayed engaged, even at times when there was a president in the Philippines who wasn't that interested in the relationship with the U.S. But we stayed connected enough such that change of administration there, and now we are quite engaged with this, and particularly with the military. And that is strategic territory in the Western Pacific. It's so important to our ability to be able to have an influence on outcomes currently, and as if things were to get a little bit worse in the theater. So that's an example there where maintaining the relationship through things that weren't necessarily military during that time period when Duterte was president was really important and enabling. Second would be, I'll give the example of something that we didn't do in one case and we did in another. And so if we'll take you back to 2005, if you remember, there was a massive tsunami it heavily affected Asia. And we, the United States of America, responded with military forces and C-17s and all kinds of aid. And now you would ask yourself, well, what difference did that make? Well, I mean, you could see the clear effect on human lives on the ground, but I would submit that we demonstrated a commitment to the country of Indonesia that has paid off quite a bit over the past subsequent 2 decades. Compare that to, Congressman mentioned this one as well, is Myanmar. Now, not necessarily a great relationship we have with Myanmar, but our complete absence is a lost opportunity because we don't know what eventually happens, and maybe 10 years from now, it's a different situation with Myanmar. So there's, gives or takes all the way along there, but the idea that if we have established a relationship of trust, it's going to create opportunity for us.
Thanks, General. Let me move from the Pacific to the Western Hemisphere, Congressman. Obviously, I serve on the subcommittee for the Western Hemisphere in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It's what the military likes to call a limited posture theater. Don't have a lot of military members on the ground, so they rely on our allies and our partners, on our connections around the world. Can you talk a little bit about why the soft power tools are so important there, and also why is it critical? These are our neighbors. Why does it matter that we're engaged in this?
Yeah, although I quickly want to address the previous question,
Sure.
and only to make this point. I was in my speech make the distinction between policy based on a system of alliances versus where I think the president wants to take us, which is the great powers, U.S., China, Russia, and all of the decisions, and we saw that most clearly in the change of position on Ukraine and no longer supporting the people of Ukraine to the level that we need to. You base it on alliances. We got to stick with our alliances, including Ukraine, you go to a great power model, now all of a sudden you're sitting down with Putin and figuring out a peace agreement without even Ukraine being at the table. But the point vis-a-vis China is this. We said at the beginning of that illegal invasion that China's watching. They're watching how the United States responds and whether we have the wherewithal to stick it out and fight in support of the people of Ukraine. And now that we have changed sides, the president has made a decision to change sides on it. Well, China is still watching. And the implications for Taiwan are very troubling. Very, very troubling. Obviously, in a world of system alliances, we're going to be there for our friends in Taiwan. In a great power system, it's in question. But no one has more at stake at that than us here in this region. This is called Arizona wins, how Arizona wins. But there's never been a better example of good foreign policy and good local economic development than what we're seeing with TSMC's investment, $160 billion right here in our community. And for that reason, we need to stand up and support Taiwan under these very, very difficult circumstances. And if the Chinese Communist Party ever makes a move on Taiwan, I hope and pray they don't, and we need to respond appropriately. If so, maintain our strategic ambiguity. If not, we could have something very serious right in our backyard, more of a local security issue as well. So it's a very important issue. As it relates to our region, look, Mexico has been such a punching bag in the political arena here in the United States of America. How self-defeating. Mexico wants a strong partnership with the United States. And on the issue of border security, we've seen that when you actually work with them, they want to improve border security on both sides as well. But they also want a comprehensive approach to it. So not just border security, but also trade and improved trade. Also better interconnectivity in terms of the ports of entry. That's critically important as well. And instead of threatening to invade Mexico, which we're literally hearing that from the president as it relates to the cartels, we should be working on a comprehensive North American strategic partnership. The World Cup's coming, by the way. So we got to do this regardless because the World Cup's coming to both Canada, U.S., and Mexico. So we need a three-country strategic partnership to make that work. But that's the way to do it, not threatening to have our military enter our next-door neighbor. But it's critical for America. Nearshoring is such an incredible opportunity for us. And we are missing that opportunity right now because instead of slapping tariffs on Mexico, we should be figuring out what parts of that semiconductor supply chain can go there, take advantage of their proximity and the fact that they can provide security in that supply chain. We are missing the boat on that, and obviously it's breaking our heart that in so many other parts of the Central and South America, China is doing more than we are in our own backyard. And we're most specifically seeing it in terms of the breaking off of any kind of relations with Taiwan in nearby neighbor after nearby neighbor. That is bad for us from a global and an economic perspective.
Absolutely, Congressman. Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to turn. This is not the first question I was going to ask you, but you talked about PEPFAR, which has saved now almost 30 million lives, which obviously great public policy that has created great goodwill for the American idea across the continent of Africa. As we're seeing right now, an ongoing outbreak of the Mpox virus in Sierra Leone, cholera in Angola, and so many other things around the world. When you were in the United States Senate, you served on the Subcommittee on Africa and Global Health Policy. Can you talk a little bit about why we need to increase our global health programs around the world and really how that creates the conditions in which it keeps us safe here at home?
Well, I think you said it. One, first, just to alleviate human suffering. Now, that is important, and I think every American is proud of what we do, regardless of what benefit we have. But as it turns out, as you mentioned, these programs are in our national security interest as well. The goodwill that we get from these programs, like I said, we have so many intelligence sharing arrangements and security agreements and public health protocols with these African countries. If there is an Ebola outbreak or something else that are an outgrowth of these programs that we have done for years. And it is concerning. Some will say, well, President Trump has said PEPFAR is going to be protected. We're still going to do that. It's difficult because that is implemented by a lot of partners that we have with our allies and nonprofits around the world, that if that funding is cut, then they can't implement the part of the program they were. And so a lot of it is very interconnected. ASU here has many programs with USAID. And so it's not just as simple as saying, we're going to protect that program, we're going to get rid of these. I mean, I'm the first to say there's plenty of bloat at USAID and everywhere that we ought to be looking at. But boy, we've got to be more strategic about it when you look at what the national interest of the United States is going forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Can I add one thing?
Please,
You're talking about outbreaks around the globe. This is a foreign policy discussion.
Yep.
But we got an outbreak of measles here in the United States, in Texas, and children have died, and we need to be doing more about that outbreak here. And I'm frustrated that we're not seeing more out of the Health and Human Services Department to deal with the immediate outbreak in the United States. Different subject, but related.
Understood. Thanks, Congressman. General, coming to you, I know you culminated your career in the Pacific, but you've spent a lot of time in Germany as well, Air Force Base. So you've seen NATO firsthand. You've seen the work that we do in our partners, our defense alliances, as well as our civilian alliances. Can you maybe share a story about your time in Germany and how you saw these alliances and partnerships work and why they matter?
Certainly. I'll actually start with an Africa story. And because the command there is U.S. Air Forces in Europe and Air Forces Africa, so it's responsible for working with the Air Forces in that part of the world. But to the Congressman's point, a little bit about PEPFAR and just more broadly the engagement. So I would get a chance to go down there and meet with counterparts in various different countries. I could usually tell within the first 10 minutes whether we were engaged at a level outside the military to the point that it made a positive impression or not. I can use an example, and specifically on PEPFAR for Botswana. So I've been down to Botswana several times. And their approach to America, I think, is heavily shaped simply by the positive effect that we've had on their population. And then it translated into a more productive exercise that we happen to be doing with them. So it's kind of, just a vignette there. I guess the other example, I'll talk a little bit about access basing and overflight and how important that is. And so this is, pretty high up on the hard power, story, but if anyone remembers April 14th, 2018, I remember that day because it was quite a busy time, but that was when we, in partnership with several different NATO allies, the president said we're going, and this is President Trump, first administration, that we're going to do some pretty heavy strikes inside Syria. And so we basically decided that we were going to own the Eastern Mediterranean for about 3 days, the entire airspace. And we were able to do that, a very complex operation, not just fighters, not just air surveillance aircraft, tankers, other support. And the way that we're able to do that, to project that, is we're able to use basing all across that part of the world. Right. There was probably 10, 12 different nations that contributed, either aircraft or personnel or basing and access. And you can only do that far away from your home country if you have the relationships established and the agreements and the commitments that are made. And when you do, you can make that decision 7 days out from execution, and then you do it.
Yeah.
And so I offer that example because it's not necessarily, a big, great power competition thing. It was, President decided this was the right thing to do in consultation with some allies, and then we were able to go out and execute it because we had built up decades of trust, and that resulted in access basing and overflight permissions that we needed.
Right. Well, thank you, General. I know some of you have put your cards up. If you have one, Bryn's gone around and grabbed a few of them, but if you have a question, please do raise your hand, and Bryn will go around and we'll start getting to audience questions here in a second. But before doing that, Congressman, I want to start with you, but I'm also going to go to Ambassador Flake. In this context, I'm going to call him Senator Flake. But a question on bipartisanship. For a long time, this issue, the investments in development and diplomacy, has been a bipartisan issue, as you know. Now, it's getting perhaps a little more complex, and there are members of Congress from both sides of the political aisle who maybe don't believe in this in the same way that they did at one point. But I think we can work across party lines to talk about this bipartisan legacy and why it matters. Maybe, Congressman, if I could come to you first, how can we build on the legacy that obviously Senator John McCain, Arizona has a robust history of here in the state as well, and where do you see opportunities for bipartisan cooperation?
Okay. I see a tremendous amount of opportunities for bipartisan cooperation. And look, for years, well before I served on the Foreign Affairs Committee, support for USAID. Not every particular program, because that's what oversight's about, is to question the effectiveness and the cost of each particular program, whether it's worth it or not. But the concept of the use of foreign aid to build soft power across the globe has been completely bipartisan. And people like Chairman McCall and Joe Wilson and others have been really very strong supporters. Obviously, with the decision of the current administration to make the dismantling of USAID literally the first department, they did that purposely. We know why. I mean, we know that U.S. foreign aid is not as politically popular as other things.
Right.
And you're able to politically then juxtapose foreign aid to serving, the Veterans Administration or whatever, very popular program, as if you could only do one or the other. But we understand exactly why they did it, and it put those folks in a very precarious political position.
Right.
I believe it'll pass. I actually believe that the strength of the argument that USGLC and others have made for the long-term importance of it will ultimately win the day, and that the bipartisanship will come back. The question is, how much damage is done in the meantime?
Sure.
And as you know, if you tear something apart, it's a lot more expensive to build it back up than just maintain it in the first place. So how difficult is it going to be to kind of build this back up after so much has been torn down? Not just in the physical cost, but in the relationship cost as well. I mean, if you break a trust, as was mentioned by Lieutenant General, you break a trust, we have this in any of our friendships and relationships. It takes a lot of work to get it back.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier just to maintain it in the first place.
Mr. Best, same question.
There's an old saying that politics stops at the water's edge, suggesting that everything we do internationally is bipartisan. That's not always true, but it's more true than domestic policy. And let me tell you, I benefited from that in my time in Turkey. I had to deal a lot. Well, starting with my confirmation hearings. It's different to be. I sat on the other side of the dais when a number of ambassadors or potential ambassadors came before the committee, and so to be on the other side of the dais is a little strange. You wonder who you ticked off or whatever. But fortunately, when I went back to Capitol Hill, and I did quite a bit, particularly on the Sweden and NATO issue, because we threw some F-16s into the mix and some foreign military sales that Congress was very much opposed to, but very much in favor of Sweden's entry into NATO. And so it was a very complicated arrangement. And when I came back, whether I met with Jim Risch or Ben Cardin or Michael McCall or Greg Meeks, the chairman and rankers on the so-called Four Corners, foreign affairs, foreign relations, they had differences of opinion on things, but not in a partisan way on Turkey. Right. And that was refreshing. And I can't tell you how helpful it was for me to be able to go back to my Turkish interlocutors and say, there's no daylight between the Republicans and the Democrats on this. They feel the same way, as does the administration. And when you have that as an ambassador, that is of tremendous value. And I would suggest we need that going forward on a number of the big issues that we're going to face.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador General. And I want to go on talk a little bit about Russia. I know earlier in your time you served as the Director of Operations for Deterrence and Nuclear Integration at the U.S. Air Force's Africa. You oversaw in that role the U.S.-led NATO objectives in deterring Russia as well. So maybe could you talk to us a little bit about your experience on how international assistance programs builds what I call civilian capacity in these countries as we try to, whether it be in Ukraine or any nearby country, to create the conditions in which they have the ability to counter Russians' aggression themselves.
Okay. Probably like the nearest example is Ukraine, and the perspective I would offer on that is actually well prior to the current conflict, even prior to 2014 and the invasion of Crimea. Noah's somewhere here in the audience, Congressman, he's on your staff. We were sharing stories about, he had been there recently doing advising. In one of my previous roles, I was doing that in 2008 and 2009. And what was going on the civil side was the U.S. being engaged with Ukraine on how to build out a civil society that has things like the rule of law, that has things that you look at your citizens in a different way. And I think that led to eventually some of the things that we're able to do with them now. It was very difficult back in 2008 and 2009 to kind of get that message across. If you take that and you go just kind of walk back on all of the other NATO allies that have joined since 1991, since the Cold War ended, that process had to occur with each one of them in order to get them to the level that A, they could join NATO, so on the kind of military side, but also just join the rest of the global economy, examples that are being mentioned here. It all happened through not just the United States, but assistance from the United States. Right. And as their civil society is growing, their military capabilities were adhering to NATO standards, and eventually they were able to apply for and then join the NATO alliance. And so we're 32 now instead of 21 or whatever it was at the time when the Cold War ended.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thanks. Thanks, General. I'm gonna start with, go next to you, Mr. Ambassador, for a question from the audience here, which I think is really important, especially considering I know you are a man of deep faith. And this question is, what do you see as the role of faith groups in talking about the importance of America's role in the world as ambassadors? I mean, you served a mission overseas. Maybe could you talk about the role of the faith community in the space?
It's critically important. Obviously, there's a deep connection by a lot of Christian faiths to what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and it's I think sometimes it complicates issues, but it's overall a huge benefit if there's a faith community that is involved and invested in what's happening overseas. Let me just say, in Turkey in February of 2023, there was a massive earthquake, killed 50,000 Turks and about 10,000 Syrians. The number of faith groups that came to the aid, whether they shared the faith or not of those involved, was extremely heartening and important. And it really, things like that build relationships that can't be done in other ways. So it's critically important, and so good question. Whoever asked that one.
Yeah.
Congressman, another question here is, you talked about it a little bit in your opening remarks, but on Mexico and the importance of the farming community, the agricultural trade we have between our two countries. But I'm gonna put it into a larger context and say both Mexico as well as Central America. We have robust economic relationships, robust civilian connections and cultural connections with our neighbors to the south. Obviously an area of expertise for you, considering your subcommittee assignment. Could you maybe talk a little bit about the economic relationship and our cultural connection and why that's so valuable?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, of course, you know, our status as a border state, I view as one of our greatest strategic advantages economically. Too often the political dynamic, our status as a border state is something to be feared or try to portray it as something to be feared. Obviously, it lends to itself to a very wonderfully diverse population. You know, in Phoenix, when I was mayor, the official Latino population was over 40%. We know as a practical matter probably was greater than 50%. We probably were a majority Latino city. So many of our Latino residents have family and friends connections in Mexico, Central, and Latin America. We know that the Latino population is number one, it's disproportionately bilingual. It is a younger population, which helps us in so many ways as well. We are an aging society. It's a very entrepreneurial community as well. And so our human capital that we have, because we have so many people from Mexico, Central, and Latin America, is I think our best kept secret or our you know, underutilized asset that we have. And so we have to invest in the human capital that we are blessed to have and take full advantage of, particularly as international trade becomes a larger and larger part of the Arizona economy. Mexico has always been in Arizona, our number one trading partner. Now it's the entire United States number one trading partner as the trade with China has gone down. And so this is, I mentioned this kind of golden moment that we have with these tensions with China should be lending itself to closer trade relationships in our hemisphere. And if we take advantage of that human capital and smart trade policies, it could be incredible economic opportunity. And I'm very concerned that we're missing it right now.
Right. Well, Congressman, with you, a question from the audience here. As we heard from Kristen Allen earlier, the impact of the State Department's funding on the economy here in Arizona. This is not Kristen's because the handwriting is atrocious, so whoever wrote this, I'm trying my best. But the question is, regarding the State Department funding and how it impacts us here at home, can you talk a little bit about how you're going to work in Congress to make sure that we don't have drastic cuts that are going to dramatically impact us here at home?
Okay. We'll do, as you heard from my speech, and my view of the world, the work that this organization does, what you advocate for, both on the support for the State Department, the role of the State Department, the role of USAID and the programs that they support, the nonprofits they support, and the for-profits that are supported by the work as well. It's not just the NGO, the NGO community is worth advocacy. Even though it's a controversial subject and it's not popular and all, when you're in a leadership position, you got to stand up even when things are tough to make the case for things that are worth supporting. And this is worth it, not as a job protection thing, but as a way to support the United States position in the globe. That's what this is all about. It's not about charity, although people benefit from it. It's about supporting the long-term interests of the United States of America, and it is worth full-throated support. Look, politically there was a lot of discussion. When the Trump administration first went after USAID and tried to dismantle it, should we wait for a more popular program before we challenge that overreach? It's overreach because it was a program supported by Congress, created by Congress, so it's illegal to dismantle. The administration cannot legally, unilaterally dismantle something created by Congress. You have to come to Congress, and we have to make that decision. It was but they chose to start with USAID. Do we wait for Department of Education, which subsequently they did do anyway? My response, and I think ultimately the response of those that view the world the way I do, is no. You've got to number one, the programs, the department is worth defending, the work they do is worth defending, and if someone overreaches beyond their constitutional boundaries, you have to bring it up. You have to fight every single one of them, because once you lose one of those, you're going to lose it on every other opportunity that they're going to have to violate the Constitution and go after things that have been congressionally approved. And we as members of Congress have to fight for our position. Our founding fathers set up a really smart form of government. Checks and balances, independence of the branches, independence of the judiciary. It's a whole different subject, but an important one as well that's under challenge right now. And so we don't have the luxury of picking and choosing. And in this case, USAID was the first one, and it's worth the fight, and obviously it's working its way through the court, but it needs not just good lawyers, it needs good advocates as well. So I'll continue to do my part. I'm in the minority, I know it, but when the public speaks, eventually the political people will listen. Yep. And so we need this community to continue to also be advocates for this view of the world.
Well, I couldn't agree with you. And thank you for your work. Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to come to you with another question here from the audience, which I think is a really fascinating one. As many of you may have heard, the State Department in the last administration created a new role for subnational diplomacy. We actually recently hosted Ambassador Nina Hachigian here in Arizona to talk about the importance of the work that states and local communities play in diplomacy. This question is to you, Mr. Ambassador. What steps can states and governors and local municipalities take to demonstrate stability and the worthiness of investment in our local community?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, this example doesn't involve Arizona. It's Utah. I happen to serve as chairman of the World Trade Center Utah, the kind of the trade promotion arm for the state. And for the past 2 weeks, I was first in Sweden with several Utah businesses that are looking at aerospace connections and critical minerals. And then I was in Canada with Utah's governor last week, meeting first in Quebec and then in Ontario with, found one example, for example, there's one company in Canada who's taking the tailings from the Kennecott mine, processing some of that in Canada, and then shipping it back to Utah, to St. George, where it's put in solar panels. You have a lot of connections like that, and in particular, if we are challenging China and they're going to cut off some of the critical minerals, we'd better work with our allies that have them, and in processing and extraction and everything else. But it's really important that subnational groups, that states can say, whatever's happening in Washington, whatever the rhetoric, we don't control that.
Right.
But we can be a reliable partner. Arizona can really do that with regard to Mexico and Canada as well. But we ought to be out there doing all the subnational diplomacy that we can to ensure our allies that they're still our allies.
Yeah. Thank you, General. This question from the audience is on ASEAN. Obviously, considering you spent a lot of your career in the Pacific, can you talk a little bit about what you saw in terms of our international multilateral relationship there and the importance for our own national security that we have strong partnerships throughout the Pacific?
Okay. I think on ASEAN, it's important to realize that's not a like security alliance, or it's a grouping of nations that have common interests, and they get together, and there is a defense dialogue called Shangri-La Talks, and that occurs on a regular basis. I do think that what you see, though, is that ASEAN is a place where nations in the Indo-Pacific come together and they realize that they have common interests, and more often than not, we give the PRC, actually, it seems like probably too much credit for being subtle and long-term thinking. Sometimes they create scenarios where it's just so dumbfoundingly obvious to the rest of the Southeast Asian nations that the PRC doesn't have their best interests at heart, and so then that results in not necessarily, again, hard military commitments, but a set of subsequent events that produce exercises or produce visits or things that are just a little bit more subtle than, you know, a direct military relationship, but send the point. Yeah. And that's, I think, more the East Asian way rather than, you know, the route that we've gone in NATO and in Europe. And it's because the starting point is different. But it's a very valuable forum, and we've seen those effects in multiple different instances.
Let me just add on real quick on the tariffs, kind of layered onto that. You know, the tariff policy, this kind of indiscriminate across the board tariff, including on our allies and friends in North America, Europe, and including our Asian friends. These reports about Japan and South Korea now in part coordinated their response with the CCP against the United States is very unsettling. You know, that we have, in part by engaging in such self-defeating policy, are now bringing people that should be completely on our side and our allies, coordinating a response with China, completely unacceptable and really does damage to our long-term interests.
Absolutely. I mean, talking about your points just now, I want to bring up the fact that we have, I think, about 15 ASU people here. I live in Nebraska, and I still wear my Sparky hat all over town. So, and thank you, Steve Rodas, with the ASU sign. Thank you. Congressman, you represent a humongous international community at Arizona State University. Over 15,000 students from 157 countries are studying at Arizona State University. Would love to ask both you and Senator Flake, who's now employed there as the director of the university's Institute of Politics, how you see international assistance and diplomacy programs contributing to our economic or to our educational kind of system here in the state, and why does that matter? I mean, as we know, international students bring a lot of money to the state economy, a lot of culture to the state economy. So maybe start with you, Congressman, and then over to Mr. Flake.
Okay, well, ASU has the largest international program university in the United States of America. And you talked about things like cultural vitality that it brings, et cetera. It's really awesome. By the way, the founders of PETA Jungle were international students, graduate students at ASU at one time.
Wow.
Anyway, I love that restaurant.
Me too.
And so, you know, and obviously it does support the university financially, a university doesn't get nearly the support from the state as their competitor university does. So that's a small aspect of it. But the intellectual firepower that it brings to this university is incredible. And if we were acting as strategically as we should in Congress, we would better leverage and take advantage of that international talent, because so many of the international students are studying in the most critical areas in STEM related fields. And our immigration system should allow for those students, particularly master's and PhD level students in STEM, to be able to receive a green card and stay here and have their lives and careers to help advance our economy. And I talked a little bit earlier, but what we're seeing right now with this attempt to revoke the student visas from so many students here at ASU and around. I was last night at the LDS church. They were doing the big Easter pageant, and I was speaking to someone that was there representing BYU. BYU just had a Japanese student who had been involved in a speeding incident, and this Japanese student lost their student visa to go to Brigham Young University. You have similar stories here. My office is working on some of those cases, so I can't get into a lot of the details of the facts, but in general, any perception that, and there's always maybe an exception, but the perception writ large that these 100+ students are doing anything nefarious is simply not true. They're just pulling their visas, and as part of a larger policy to try to remove as many foreign citizens that are here in the United States. And I guess it's easy pickings at these universities, but what a shame, because you're going to have so many countries around the globe recommend that students no longer attend American universities for fear that they would be the next one to have their student visas revoked. And we're losing that intellectual firepower, and again, this massive competitive advantage we have by having the best university system in the country. Again, I would argue one of the most self-defeating things we could be doing at this very moment.
Thanks. Mr. Bester?
Yeah, just take Turkey, for example. You go on the street and meet any Turk, and it's a point of pride for them that their father, their mother, their sister, brother, or niece, or nephew attended school in the United States. Turkey sends more European students to the U.S. than just about anybody. And that has benefited us significantly there. Not only those programs, but the military exchanges, and others. There was a time when Turkey was more skeptical of the U.S. after the attempted coup there. So we went for about almost 10 years without any military exchanges. And that is a gap that we're dealing with now.
Right.
That is going to be problematic. And I would suggest it's the same with students or lack of students. Not only do they bring a great deal of money, but the understanding and culture. They're always ambassadors for the U.S. after that. I'll be in Uzbekistan in a couple of weeks. ASU has a campus there, operated as an American university, I think, in Uzbekistan.
Right.
They have one in Kyiv. They're going to establish one in Istanbul as well. So that's a tremendous benefit to the bilateral relationship.
By the way, and I agree, we're not naive. We understand that Chinese Party does engage in nefarious activities, and in part on American campuses in terms of intellectual property and science issues and misutilization of the information that they gain in that regard, including in basic science. So we have to be vigilant. No one's suggesting otherwise. But what we're talking about is something very different. It's revoking student visas for things unrelated to nefarious activity.
And I'll say I had the opportunity to go with the National Guard to Kazakhstan, where we have a long-standing 30-plus year partnership. And we went to 3 universities, and the first one had a picture of Sparky in there, and it was just this extremely, it was so valuable for them to be a member of the ASU network. The next one had a Wildcat, and even though I dreaded going through those doors, it was beautiful. Just kidding. A beautiful, academic connection that we found in a country in Central Asia. So really a wonderful thing. I'm going to come to you, General, with one, please.
Well, I think that's a really relevant point about the international military exchange programs.
Yeah.
The programs that we have, our allies and partners, they send their best to those programs. And it starts all the way with, like when I was at the Air Force Academy, there were students from multiple different countries. And some of them have ended up chiefs of the Air Force. Another example would be a colleague of mine went to the Naval War College. She's an airman, but he was on a joint tour there with the Navy, and his classmate is now the chief of the Indian Navy. Wow. And so those relationships take decades, and we have to have the foresight in advance, and when there's a hole in it, you have to work your way through that bathtub. Right. That translated to all of the education that occurs in our universities. There's an affiliation and an appreciation of America that is hard to quantify until you see it happen when you have an interaction with somebody who's been educated here in America.
Right.
And it's a challenging issue, but it's a real one. You know, the future of military challenges is in part what's going to happen in space. Yep. And our universities here in Arizona are some of the leading universities in space technology. We need to keep investing in these universities and the research that they're doing, because it does help our long-term military operations, including make sure that we maintain superiority anywhere on this planet or in space. And those students, those international students studying those particular areas, can also be helpful in that, to keep our military advantage in that most critical arena. And Arizona universities are on the cutting edge of that arena. Absolutely.
And we've got just a couple, and I have one closing question for all three of you, but I got one great question here from the audience, and I'm just, General, it's towards you. I don't know if there's, usually we have one of those big signs with somebody's face on it of Secretary Mattis, where he says, if you don't fully fund the State Department, then I have to, it's here, Brent, it's outside, so maybe whoever wrote this got some, saw that and wanted to ask about it, but he said, if you don't fully fund the State Department, I need to buy more ammunition. Just very quickly, 3+ decades in the military, what does that mean? How do you read that? Is it still true?
It's security at pennies on the dollar. I mean, if we don't have to, I don't know, I'll just use have another squadron of airplanes at $3 billion because we have a relationship with an ally or a partner that's willing to do it and is capable on their own. I mean, it's very simple math. So the wisdom of it, you can debate the eaches, and we should, but the overall wisdom of the principle is something that is going to be universal and lasting for as long as we're, a nation.
Wonderful. We'll start with you, but I'm going to ask all three of you the same question, General, then Mr. Ambassador, and then over to the Congressman to close us out before I'll give a couple of closing remarks to let us go, but we'll go, starting with you, General. This event, as the Congressman has said, is called How Arizona Wins. I know you're not an Arizonan yourself, but in terms of, as we talk about the value and the importance of America's international assistance and how that creates the conditions in which Arizona wins, could you maybe talk about, from your military experience, how do you see this strategy of benefiting the world because it benefits us, America's strategic growth? How does this help America win? Yeah. Starting with you then.
So not an Arizonan, but an airman, and so that would be the example that I would give. It's just a few miles away.
Yeah. Luke Air Force Base.
The place, exactly, where almost every, it used to be every, but almost every single F-35 pilot in the world is trained, is right there at Luke Air Force Base. And so the continuance and growth of that program, a little known fact, there are more F-35s in service with European Air Force than there are in the United States Air Force. Think about that.
Wow.
And that training, your community supports it and gets benefits from it, and continuing the activities that go on there, and then maybe growing them with other training programs, I think are a great benefit to the state of Arizona and this local community.
Arizona has benefited for generations by people who came to Luke and Davis Monthan and stayed, or came back afterwards when they retired. But to that point, in terms of, I mentioned F-16s to Turkey. Turkey was kicked out of the F-35 program. They're hoping to get back in. I hope they do. But when they do, that ties them to our industrial base, ties them to us, tethers them to us for decades and decades. And that benefits Arizona significantly because of our significantly the air bases that we have. But the research dollars that are here, the nonprofits, the university groups, and programs that support nonprofits and State Department operations overseas, that's huge here in Arizona and very important. And then our proximity to Mexico is important. We benefit not just that a rising tide lifts all boats, it does, but we have a specific interest in our southern border and trade with Mexico.
Congressman.
Okay, I have nothing particular to add to those outstanding answers, other than to make this point. Luke Air Force Base is important to us. The F-35 program is critically important to us. And I got a little tit for tat with Elon Musk and his Doge team, because Elon Musk tried to suggest that the future of air warfare is all in drones, and that there's no future for manned aircraft. And these arguments that I've heard here today I'm gonna use them back in Washington, that we need that F-35 program, not just for our own military superiority, our air superiority, but that F-34 program can be part of international diplomacy on behalf of the United States in ways that almost nothing else can. That is a thought-provoking argument. I'm going to use that exact one. And then an issue that Senator Flake just brought up. Our proximity here in Arizona, we are uniquely positioned to take advantage in the Western Hemisphere of stronger trade alliances and growing trade alliances. And we're in a bad spot right now. There's no two ways about it. But we're Americans. We are the strongest country on planet Earth, the strongest economy on planet Earth, and we veered off in the wrong direction in the past, and we're going to get back in the right direction, and recommitting ourselves to building the strongest alliances here in North America and around the globe is a core American value, and even though we're in a challenging time right now, I have full confidence we are going to get back to that and to maintain our strong economy and our leadership in this globe.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Mr. Ambassador, if you guys could put your hands together with me. Thank you for being here. Alrighty, just a quick couple of remarks and then we'll get you over to lunch. And just as a reminder, we do have box lunches out there, so if you'd like to grab them and go, or you'd like to grab them and there are places to sit outside, feel free to do that as well. But honestly, the best part of my job is having the opportunity to work with all of you. So if you don't know me, please get to know me. I spend a lot of time in Arizona, not just because I love this state, but because my whole family's here, so I'm here quite a bit, and hope to have the opportunity to get to know all of you. Please save the date for those of you who may be new to USGLC to our upcoming Global Impact Forum. It's on the 9th and 10th of June in Washington, D.C., where Congressman Stanton always is kind enough to give us some time to meet with him in his office and other members of the delegation. I sincerely hope you'll join us for that. Bryn's about to put up a QR code on our website. This is getting to our website. If you'd like to stay involved with USGLC, I hope thank you for all you taking out your phones, do the camera thingy, and sign up for updates. We'll keep you apprised as to what's happening in Washington, D.C., the things we're doing here in Arizona, and so much more. But really, at the end of the day, I just want to say thank you. I hope today's conversation is not the last one you have about the value of America's engagement in the world and why it matters for our national security and our economic security here at home. To talk about it with your family and with your friends and your community, and when people like Congressman Stanton or other members of the delegation talk about why this is important, reach out and say thank you. I'm a former congressional staffer myself, members of Congress, and I know your staff would say the same. Do not get thanked enough for when they go to bat and say this matters to us and to our community. So thank you again, Congressman. Thank you all for taking time out of your day today. It truly is because of people like you that put in your voice and your passion and your work that America can continue to be safer, stronger, and more prosperous. So thank you, Congressman. Have a good rest of your day. Good job, all right. Thank you, sir.